What's up? So this Lent, it has been up and down, which is perfect. That's how Lent should be. It shouldn't be easy. But I found out why I've always hated disciplinary programs like Exodus 90. This program and I have been like in a love-hate relationship for the first few weeks of Lent. I'm back in love with it. I'll explain more in a second. So this is part 3 of the Addict's Guide to Lent, this kind of 7-part weekly series during Lent that I'm putting together. And it's all about inviting Christ to love all of you, not to separate certain parts that you're like ashamed of, but to let Christ love you through those parts. Now last week we talked about temptation, how you can't be tempted to do anything that you don't desire or that like a part of you doesn't desire. So this week, and I know I said I wanted to talk about like failure and success this week, but through kind of some prayer and thinking, I want to add like a bridge into it and not just jump right into how to redefine failure and success. Okay, so focusing on temptations, when we looked at the 4-letter acronym HALT, you are stressed, your body is stressed when you are hungry, when you are angry, when you are lonely, and when you are tired. This is us trying to discover like when temptations are going to come about. We're becoming more self-aware so that we can go attack those moments rather than just like sit back and wait for them to come in. Now this is a really good like immediate solution, but it is that. It's a short-term solution. And I want to really propose more of a long-term solution over this Addict's Guide in Lent. That being said, I really need to ask you, what do you want here? And I ask this question because what you are aiming for drives any success or failure you will have. And that's why we're going to be talking about what we're aiming for in this video. Okay, Exodus 90. Man, I figured out why I hate them. I figured out why I hate disciplinary programs so much. So I was like really amped to do it this year. It was the first year I felt like I was in a really good place to grow closer to God, which is correct. I was just kind of tested in my resolve for that. And it's because I became quickly distracted, like I always used to. That like when you add this discipline in, you get so focused on like what you're not allowed to do rather than focusing on this now free time that you have, what you're doing with that free time, what you're growing in that free time. I would just become so like upset that I can't do hot showers or that I can't like play video games, that I wasn't focusing on what I was doing with that time. I wasn't focusing on God. This right here is where I screwed up so bad. I wasn't focusing on God. If I'm being honest with myself, all I really wanted out of this program was like a freedom from pornography. I wanted sobriety. And this is where like my anger came from, because I wanted this sobriety. I judged my happiness on if I acted out or not during a day while I was doing this program, instead of like focusing on developing a relationship with God. And if you're like me at all, like this is a natural thought process when you're trying to get something out of your life. You want it out. And when it keeps coming back in, you get upset about it. This makes sense. It's okay if you do this. However, what this does is it gets you focused on yourself. You want out of pornography. You want a sobriety rather than a relationship, a flow between you and God. Our entire ability to let Christ in depends on our like paying attention to Him. It's like He always wanted us to become one with Him. That is the game. That is what we should be aiming for. See, getting out of pornography, it's not about sobriety. It is about connection. It is about a relationship with a God who loves us and wants the best for us. It's not about being alone. It's about being one. Now, to really kind of keep driving this, I really want to stay on the sobriety hype train and just kind of like crash it into non-existence anymore, okay? So if you're striving to get out of pornography, you may notice that any sobriety you have, whether it's literally just a couple hours or a couple days, the temptations grow over time. It becomes harder. They become stronger and more often the longer you're out. You're like 5 days free. You're sober. You're supposed to be happy, but it's like so constricting, you don't even know what to do with your life. Have you noticed that as this sobriety, this precious sobriety starts to build up, you start acting in a certain way? And you're not like chasing temptation, but you're not keeping it from happening. Whether it's like, I'm gonna start scrolling through Instagram, or really kind of aimlessly scrolling through Facebook. You know, if something pops up, it's whatever. I wasn't planning on it, but I'm just gonna sit there and scroll until something does. You allow this room for temptation, so no matter how many days it's been, inevitably, you fall back in. Your sobriety gets crushed. So I'll ask you this, what's on the other side of this like hurdle of pornography? Like, what lies when you achieve this precious sobriety? There's nothing. There's nothing over there. And it turns out when you're focused on the sobriety, you're only living out half of the gospel. You want to act as though you've been saved from sin, but you're not acting as though you have new life. In Romans chapter 6, verse 4, it talks about how we are buried with Christ through baptism, this baptism that unites us with him, his death and resurrection. And it's through this unity that as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of our Father, we too may have this new life. This is one of the most ridiculous like ploys that pornography really has. It's so devious, so brilliant. You just gotta like slow clap the devil while you flip him off on the way to hell. That's a little much. Is it though? It's our job to put Satan and the demons back into hell by being advocates for Christ, by letting him flow through us so much so that we push them back into hell. Sorry, tangent. Devious ploy, pornography, the trap. The hurdle of pornography is the trap. Chasing sobriety, focusing only on sobriety is the trap. Without even thinking about it, this like sobriety becomes your master rather than Christ and this new life, which is more than just the absence of a sin or two. And God even warns about this in Romans 1, verse 24 through 25. This is like a raw, St. Paul's talking about how God can often allow us to struggle in our sin because we are worshiping our own creation. Our own creation here is this sobriety that we're focusing on this thing rather than on God. Our aim is way off. We're focused on this hurdle rather than building this relationship. And in Romans, he literally says that God allows us to keep struggling when we are not focused on him. Where was this? Like, for all of my high school and college. Why didn't I hear about this? This message is crazy, and it's not just in the Bible. In Dostoyevsky's Notes from the Underground, this is in part 1, chapter 8. There's this story of this hypothetical paradise that you have when you can have all of the earthly pleasures you want, whether that is like all the food, warm baths, sex, or not. It's whatever you want. That you live this life where you don't have to strive for anything. He talks about what happens almost immediately is your spirit grows bored, it grows insane. You start to like break things because like you need something to do. You need something to strive against. This is the nature of our human soul. That when we're given everything, when we achieve this sobriety, since we don't have something to plug into, to continually grow at, we end up self-sabotaging and stepping backwards, back into falling. This is when we set up like we don't actively seek out temptation, but we leave room for it. This is like a mind-blowing, like life-changing message that getting out of pornography, it's not about sobriety. It's about connection. It's about focusing on God, aiming towards God. It's about seeking a personal relationship with him, he who is this God of love, of connection, of relationship. I'm talking about a life free from sin, power over sin. This is completely different than like trying to chase sobriety forever. I'm talking about your ability to rise above the compulsive, like just daily drowning temptations, which is kind of what we talked about in the last video. Once you actually focus on God, once you start your day with God, rather than being worried about all this discipline or all this other stuff, you're focused on Him. You start to realize this drives a new life, redeeming like all of the aspects of who you are, not just pornography and masturbation. It's not about chasing sobriety. It's about orienting ourselves to God, focusing on Him. Now that we know where to aim, what we really want out of this, now we can talk about failure and success in the next few videos.